All right, welcome back. This is week 4 Fantasy Central. This is your host, the one, the only, the Oracle himself, Z Money Zach Hall, and I am here with the fantasy guru, Hefe.
What's going on, everybody? How we doing?
Hey, first off, I want to apologize to everybody out there. I've been battling illness this last week, so I know my voice sounds weird at the moment, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me through it, and we hope we could give you a good show today. All right, I'll start off saying week 3 was interesting, man. Josh Allen popped off for 40 points, looked like the MVP against Washington. Devontae Adams showed why he was a top wide receiver last year with a 12 catch, 1 touchdown, 132-yard performance. Cooper Kupp, another 30-point game, his third in as many games this year. And I would like to finally welcome rookie Najee Harris into fantasy relevance after throwing down 30 big ones against Cincy. Dude had 14 receptions and over 100 yards receiving alone. What do you think about that, Hefe?
Yeah, it looks like with the way Big Ben is playing and the way he looks, it looks like there's going to be a lot of checkdowns. I believe it was 14 catches on 19 targets, which that is ridiculous for a running back to be getting. So I expect 19 targets every game is completely unrealistic. But the way that offense is working and with the receivers getting hurt there, I think Najee Harris is going to have huge weeks pretty much every week.
Yeah, it took him a couple weeks to get in there, but he's here, and we'll see if he's here to stay. But that's enough about week 3. It's time to move on to week 4. So if you're ready, let's do it.
Yep, let's get into it, man.
All right, we have a good show for you guys today. Lots of in-depth analysis we think will benefit you in your fantasy matchup this week. We're going to start with Hefe's top waiver wire picks, head into his top 10 running backs and wide receivers for the week, and we'll finish up with some surefire stardoms and situms. So without further ado, let's do it. Week 4 waiver wire. Who you looking at snagging on the line this week?
So the number one has to be Chuba Hubbard, right? Like, I mean,
Agreed.
when
Yep.
you're filling in for CMC, we saw with Mike Davis last year. There's always going to be value there, especially in that offense. We've seen what Christian McCaffrey was doing. Look, Chuba Hubbard had 4.7 yards per carry. He had 3 catches. After Christian McCaffrey went out of the game, that's pretty good. And so I think obviously his production, I probably going to be a starter for whoever picks him up. You'd kind of be ridiculous not to start him at this point. So he's the number one. And then the rest of these are no particular order really. They're just up here. So I have Tyler Conklin, the tight end for the Vikings, filling in for Irv Smith Jr., who is on the IR. And right now, with the way the tight ends are, this dude's had one good game. This last game he had 20 points, but he's tied in 9. Right. So if Kirk Cousins is going to be more comfortable throwing to him, then I expect Tyler Conklin to have some value, especially with the way Kirk Cousins is playing right now. Right there, he has Jefferson and Thielen are both in the top 10 of wide receivers. We've seen Osborne be good, and Tyler Conklin is right there. He has some value right now, so go pick him up. Next one's going to be Taylor Heineke. And, we've seen him do well for his first 4 starts now, and he's lost a couple games. But from a fantasy perspective, he's a good quarterback right now. He's QB 17 overall. But remember, he didn't play most of that first game. He had he had a 21-point game in his last game. And with the defense in Washington not being very good, actually kind of historically bad up to this point in some ways, then I expect Taylor Heineke to have to throw the ball quite a bit, and he has some rushing value. He's been standing in the pocket more than I thought he would, but he does have that rushing value. If he needs to, he can escape and get you some yards. Next up is going to be Zach Moss, somebody that I was high on coming into this year. In the preseason, when me and Zach did our fantasy draft special, I had mentioned that Zach Moss is somebody that I expect to take that starting role at some point, and he did well last week. Had a 15-point game last week, and he came out this last week and he out-touched Devin Singletary. He had a pretty good game. He had 18, so that makes 2 games in which he's played. He's been at 15 plus, which is pretty good flex value. Somebody that could slot in there. I don't see that not being the case week to week. He has 3 touchdowns in 2 weeks. And so I expect Zach Moss to be a part of every game plan going forward. He's looked good. Somebody that for sure should be rostered. I'm very happy that I have him in my league. I actually have a plethora of running backs. I want to take Chuba Hubbard, but I don't even have anybody that I think I should drop for it. So Zach Moss, somebody that I think should have flex value pretty much every week. And then Giovanni Bernard coming out and finally had a good game for the Buccaneers. They used him. And like, this is a team that has no running game, but the passing game works just fine for him, right? So Giovanni Bernard, we've seen him have the passing game value with the Bengals in the past, and it looks like that might be the route that they're taking here. I wouldn't play him this week. I'd want to see, is this going to be his consistent role going forward? But after this week, he should be rostered because I could see him getting a lot of that James White type usage. We're going to finish it up here. I have a running back and a receiver. This running back, might not have the most long-term value. It's Peyton Barber for the Las Vegas Raiders. Kenyon Drake obviously just isn't going to get it done there. They're paying him a lot of money. I thought he'd get more usage, but Peyton Barber was obviously looking like the better running back yesterday. He came out with 23 points, fantasy points in that game. And so if Josh Jacobs, if he continues to be injury prone, that's where Peyton Barber's real value is going to come in. It's going to be valuable to have him stashed away if you're able to. So I could see Peyton Barber being rostered in a lot of leagues after this week. And then to finish it off is Deshaun Jackson. We hadn't seen much of him over the first couple weeks, but he had 21 points this last game. Matt Stafford took 3 or 4 deep shots to him, just under threw a couple of them, but then finally hit him on the last one. Deshaun Jackson is 34 years old, I believe now, and I mean still flying past defenders. He was getting past the secondary whenever he was out there, and so if McVay mentioned that he wants to use Deshaun Jackson more, they came out, they proved that, and with as effective as Cooper Kupp is. And you can't forget about Robert Woods. And also Van Jefferson's been useful for that offense. Like, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for Deshaun Jackson to end up in one-on-one situations, slip past the safety, and Matt Stafford is not afraid to throw that ball. So right now, Deshaun Jackson is somebody that should be rostered in every single league.
I like your list. To kind of summarize what you said, running back Chuba Hubbard, tight end Tyler Conklin, quarterback Taylor Heineke, running back Zach Moss, running back Giovanni Bernard, running back Peyton Barber, and wide receiver Deshaun Jackson. I particularly like the Peyton Barber one. He had a huge game last week. Jacobs has been out with an injury, but maybe back for the Raiders in week 4, going up against the Chargers. If Jacobs is out, look for Peyton Barber to once again lead this rushing attack. Either way, I like the matchup with the Chargers. I actually have have Jacobs or Barber on my top running backs for the week. The Chargers defense they're giving up 170 yards a game, 5.75 yards per carry, both of which are the most in the league. So can't go wrong either one of those guys. Peyton Barber shouldn't be rostered right now in your league, so definitely snag him up. He could be very useful, especially if Jacobs is out this week.
Yeah, and hopefully it's the Josh Jacobs being hurt thing isn't something that's going to become a theme, because he's really good when he's in there, right? He's a great player, but it's between the end of last season and what we've seen early this season seems to be something of a trend. So Peyton Barber needs to be rostered.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to Jeffe's top 10 running backs for week 4 of the 2021-2022 NFL season. We'll start with number 10.
Number 10 coming in is Aaron Jones going up against the Steelers. I wanted to have them higher, but when it comes to the Steelers, their secondary is not great right now, but their front 7 is pretty stout. And I think they'll do a good job of stopping the run. They're 5th in the league against running backs up to this point from fantasy perspective. And there's always going to be value for Aaron Jones. Like I said, I wanted to put him higher. He's the main back there, where we've seen Rodgers against the 49ers was 16 of 16 throwing the ball in under 2.5 seconds. And if you're getting the ball out that quick, you'd have to think some of those targets are going to Aaron Jones, which we already saw in week 2 when he had 3 touchdown receptions. So he can explode for touchdowns through the air or on the ground. Somebody that I feel very confident having a top 10 week. Number 9 is a guy, finally had a good week, is James Robinson. They finally decided to go back to their workhorse guy, gave him the workhorse kind of workload, and hopefully that's what they do going forward. They were at least competitive for most of that game against the Cardinals, so maybe they just use what worked and try to build off that. And I think James Robinson is going to continue to be fantasy relevant now. A couple down weeks. Hopefully he can sustain it, and I think he will. The Cincinnati Bengals are 19th against running backs in fantasy football to this point. And I think, again, with the workhorse workload, James Robinson should be at least close to a top 10 guy every single week going forward, in my opinion. Number 8 is going to be Antonio Gibson going up against the Falcons. And in this last game with Washington, they had a really tough game, didn't really get anything going on offense until it was garbage time. But Antonio Gibson, most of his fantasy value came off one huge play in the pass game. And when there's that between the talent and the workload going up against this weak Falcons defense, I expect Antonio Gibson to have a very good week. I expect the football team to bounce back in some sort of way and be able to put down the Falcons. So Antonio Gibson is a top 10 guy for me at number 8 this week.
Yeah, I can't argue with any one of those three guys. I'm always high on Aaron Jones. He's more than capable of making a play, no matter who he's playing. James Robinson definitely bounced back. I was high on him coming into the season. Up until this point, he had yet to prove anything, but it looks like they found that chemistry with him and Antonio Gibson. He's just a stud, and I do like the matchup. So you got 10 Aaron Jones, 9 James Robinson, 8 Antonio Gibson. Let's move on to number 7.
All right, number 7 is a consistent top 10 guy. It's Austin Eckler going up against the Raiders here, who are 17th against running backs in fantasy. And Austin Eckler, he's just so consistent, right? He's running back 5 right now. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be in the top 10 somewhere. It's just figuring out, who's going above him, who's going below him. So Austin Eckler, he's going to get his catches. He's going to put up his points. He's my number 7 this week. Alvin Kamara, looks like that Saints offense, when they want to win, the offense has to go through Kamara right now. So I expect that to continue. I expect him to be a huge part of the game plan. They're going up against the Giants, who are 25th in fantasy football against running backs right now. And Alvin Kamara, I feel like I should have put him higher, but the guys above him, I feel like are going to have pretty big weeks, pretty good reason for all of them. So Alvin Kamara coming in at number 6. And to start off the top 5 is going to be Nick Chubb going against Minnesota. And we just saw Kareem Hunt had the better game this week. Kareem Hunt, I believe, was the second best running back in fantasy this week. And I feel like if you look back to last year and even this year, after Kareem Hunt has a big game, Nick Chubb explodes for like 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like it just feels
he
like
he don't want to lose his damn job, man.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I expect them to go to him. I expect them to be winning for most of this game, which might be a bold statement. The Vikings offense has been pretty good, but I do think the Browns will be up in this game. They're going to lean on Nick Chubb, and I expect him to be a top 5 guy this week.
Yeah, so I can't argue with any of those. Number 7, Austin Eckler. Number 6, Alvin Kamara. Number 5, Nick Chubb. All 3 of those guys are pretty much must-start players every single week of the season, so no arguments for me there. All right, let's move on to number 4.
Number 4, somebody that's been, surprisingly just and quietly just up at the top of the rankings every week is DeAndre Swift. And they're going against Chicago this week. Chicago's defense, not very good. They might be without Khalil Mack. That's yet to be seen. But they're 29th against running backs in fantasy right now. And with the workhorse kind of workload that DeAndre Swift is getting, I honestly thought, especially after the first game, that Jamal Williams would eat into DeAndre Swift's production, but it just hasn't worked out that way. And DeAndre Swift is making the most of it. He looks good right now, and the offense in Detroit completely runs through DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson. Those are the guys that are fantasy relevant for them. They're going to continue to be fantasy relevant because they don't have the receivers there, right? So you're seeing a lot of the pass work game that comes in for DeAndre Swift, and I expect that to continue, especially against Chicago. So he's my number 4 this week. Number 3 is Saquon Barkley coming out. Finally had a big game against the Falcons. I know it was a weaker opponent, but they go against New Orleans. And look, Saquon has looked better every week. Saquon has gotten more of the workload every week. He played 84% of the snaps this past week against the Falcons, which is great to see. You want to see Saquon on the field because when he's on the field, he can do everything. So with the injuries to the wide receivers that are happening for the Giants right now, I just think Saquon is going to continue to get the targets. The offensive line isn't great, so that's going to even better in terms of getting catches to Saquon Barkley. And from a rushing standpoint, it might be a tough day, but I don't think they're going to rush very much because the Saints are probably going to be up for most of this game. So Saquon, like I said, I think he's my number 3 this week. I think he's going to have a lot of passing game value, probably get in the end zone at least once. And he's my number 3 this week.
All right. Let's talk about Saquon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might be right if he plays well in the passing game, but the Giants' offense as a team just has really struggled. Rushing wise, like you said, Saquon finally had solid fantasy performance last week against the Falcons. Unfortunately, the Saints' defense is a lot better than Atlanta's. Week 1 against the Broncos, Saquon was held to just 2.6 yards per carry and a measly 3 fantasy points. This Saints defense is better than the Broncos when it comes to the rush, statistically speaking. I know, I'm a big numbers guy. Despite facing 5 more carries per game than the Broncos, they're only giving up 2.8 yards per carry, which is 0.6 yards better than Denver. So I expect them to really tighten down on Barkley rushing wise. Passing game might be a different story, but he's going to have a huge passing game in order to make up for the lack of rushes, because this Denver defense, or the Saints defense, I should say, is ferocious. And I'm fairly certain Saquon's going to have kind of the same performance he had week 1 against Denver.
Yeah, and I can understand that, right? That it's just one good game for Saquon after a major injury, going up against a tough opponent, and it was hard to put him up there. But I just feel like if he's going to be in for 85% of the snaps, there's got to be value there. So again, with the injuries to the wide receivers, if the wide receivers were healthy, I probably wouldn't have him this high. But I think Daniel Jones is going to have to look for a playmaker, and I think Saquon is going to be that guy.
You may be right. I guess we will find out. Unfortunately, you have him as number 3 on your top 10. I personally have him on my sit-em list, but that's fantasy. We'll see what happens there. Yeah, that's all I really got there. To go back to DeAndre Swift, I do like the matchup against the Bears. I think he'll have a great game. And did you hit on number 2? You did number 2, right?
Nope. To save 2 and 1.
All right. Well, let's move on to number 2.
All right, number 2, it's going to be Najee Harris. We already mentioned him just a little while ago. 14 catches on 19 targets only in week 3. That's not for the season. That was in 1 week. So if Big Ben continues to not be able to throw the ball downfield, and the wide receivers are hurt, we saw Juju get hurt. That was a factor, and Najee Harris having such a big workload and what we saw. And they can't run the ball, but they're going up against Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers is probably going to tear that secondary apart. The Steelers are probably going to be behind in that game, and we could see Najee Harris get another 12 to 15 targets, which is going to be great for whoever drafted him in fantasy. So I think he's going to have another big game here. I mean, the Packers, the weak spot for them is the defense, right? They're 18th against running backs. Their defense hasn't looked great up to this point. So Najee Harris, everything is working together for him to have a massive week. I have him at number 2. And really thought about putting him at number 1, but RB1 is RB1 for a reason, right? So Derrick Henry, he's the king. What can you say? He's doing it all. Actually, he's already got 12 catches this season which puts him on pace for 68. The most catches he's ever had in a single season was 19. So, all the value is there for Derrick Henry. They're having him do even more, especially over the last couple games. That's where a lot of his value is coming, is over the last couple games. But it looks like they're going back to him, and they play the Jets this week, and the Jets are the worst team in the NFL. So Derrick Henry, especially without A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, maybe not in the lineup, you would expect Derrick Henry probably to have like 250, maybe even a 300-yard game, couple touchdowns.
Boy, that would be insane if he pulls a 300.
It feels like he might.
I mean, he's more than capable of doing that too. That's the scary thing about it. So, yeah, I agree with you, Derrick Henry. He's a must-start player. He's a defending rushing champ. So, if you have Derrick Henry, you're going to play him. He should perform well, especially against this pretty shitty Jets team. All right, let's move on to your top 10 wide receivers for the week 4 of fantasy football. We'll start with number 10.
Yeah, before I do this, I just want to say that having to rank the wide receivers week to week is the hardest thing to do, because there's multiple good receivers on every team, and it's hard to decipher who's going to get it week to week. But we're just spitballing here. Somebody that I was high on coming into the year is Calvin Ridley. And it's been pretty disappointing. He hasn't done terrible, but he hasn't had the flashy plays and the big numbers that we expected him to. He used to find the end zone all the time. Seems like teams are keying in on him and stopping him, which stops what the Falcons can do on offense. But they play the Washington football team this week, and their secondary, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, their defense has been in some ways historically bad, including being currently the worst team in NFL history on third down. So they're 31st against wide receivers in fantasy. I expect Calvin Ridley to be able to take advantage of the secondary here. I'm not sure what happened to this defense after it was so good last year, but they got to get things figured out. I don't know if it happens this week. So Calvin Ridley stays at number 10 for me. Number 9 is going to be the same guy I had at number 9 last week, but he had a disappointing week. It's Marvin Jones Jr. The good thing with Marvin Jones Jr. is that the targets are there, and this team is probably going to play from behind in pretty much every game. So he's a guy that I'm going to at least consider for the top 10 most weeks. They're going up against Cincinnati, who are 24th against receivers. And I think Cincinnati's going to be up in this game. I think Cincinnati's going to win. So I expect Marvin Jones again to see a bunch of targets in this game. I think DJ Chark had a marginally better. He had like 2 more fantasy points than Marvin Jones this past week. But outside of that, Marvin Jones has been dominating the targets for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I expect that to continue, and for him to be the 9th best receiver this week. Number 8 is a guy that's been kind of disappointing this year, especially after Josh Allen just absolutely snapped Stephon Diggs. But I think it's his turn. If MVP Josh Allen is here to stay, Stephon Diggs is going to be the major beneficiary from that. And I think it's going to be this week. They go up against Houston, who's actually 9th against wide receivers. But you have to imagine that's because teams get up and start running on them, so they're not passing the ball a lot. So I think Stephon Diggs is going to be the guy. The Bills are just, 35, 43. They've 78 points in the last 2 games. Right, so they're going to hang the points up and then take the foot off the pedal. Stephon Diggs should be a top 10 wide receiver this week.
Yeah, I agree. I know I have Diggs in one of my leagues, I think. Maybe both. No, just one. But yeah, anyways, he's in my book. He's one of the top receivers. I know he hasn't fared well the first 3 games in fantasy, but his time is coming, and especially with Josh Allen playing the way that he played last week, which you and I agree that he's going to continue playing that way. We both have him as our preseason MVP pick. Stephon Diggs is more than capable of making a play at any given moment. He's going to get his throughout the rest of the season. So I like the Stephon Diggs there. I think he's a every week starter. And to go back to your number 10, Calvin Ridley, I actually have him on my must start list this week. Ridley is Atlanta's number one receiver and has been somewhat consistent so far this year. He's averaging 15 fantasy points per game in PPR. He has huge upside against a very weak Washington secondary, like you were discussing. And they've given up 307 yards per game and a total of 6 touchdowns on the year so far. So I do like Calvin Ridley, and Matt Ryan's more than capable of getting him the ball there. So to recap, you got number 10, Calvin Ridley, number 9, Marvin Jones Jr., number 8, Stephon Diggs. We'll move on to number 7.
Number 7, it kind of hurt having to take Keenan Allen out of my top 10, but man, Mike Williams is balling out right now, and it's nice to see. And I saw somebody explain, I believe it was Field Yates that was talking about how Mike Williams, his average depth of target this season it was like 9.7, I believe, and at least going into week 3. And whereas the rest of Mike Williams' career, his average depth of target was 15. Right. And so when you're closer to the line of scrimmage, it's going to be easier to get the ball. And it looks like Brandon Staley and his coaching staff are using the talent that they have to the best of their ability. They're getting the most out of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen right now. But Mike Williams, I believe, is wide receiver 2 right now, if I'm not mistaken. And he, like I say, he's balling out. I expect him to continue to ball out. Him and Justin Herbert, even last year, didn't mind throwing that dude the ball, right? There were a couple big Mike Williams games last year. So he might be a consistent top 10 guy. He looks great right now. They're playing the Raiders, who have been better on defense than expected, but they're 16th against wide receivers right now in fantasy. So Mike Williams comes in at number 7. Number 6, I was so glad to be able to put here. It's DJ Moore. He's having a huge year right now, which I didn't really expect after what we saw from Robbie Anderson in the first year of Matt Rule's offense. It looks like DJ Moore has completely taken over this year. I don't know what happened, but he's getting a bunch of targets right now, and he's turning it into a lot of fantasy points, which has been great. I have him on my fantasy team. I think I've had him on my fantasy team for like 3 straight years now. I love having DJ Moore, and he's balling out with CMC out. You would have to imagine he's going to continue to get the heavy target share. So he's going to be my number 6 going against Dallas, who's 27th against wide receivers.
Yeah, I like the Mike Williams pick. We were expecting him to really explode a couple weeks ago, but he definitely showed what he's more than capable of this last week. DJ Moore, he's also on my must starts for this week. He's by far Carolina's go-to wide receiver, averaging more than 7 receptions on 10 targets and 95 yards per game. Meanwhile, the Cowboys secondary is 31st in passing yards given up per game at 331 and have allowed a total of 7 touchdowns this year so far. However, they do have a league-leading 6 interceptions on the year, but I still expect DJ Moore to ball out this game and have a huge game. All right, number 5.
So cracking up into the top 5 here is Jamar Chase. And look, I mean, you have to put him here. Joe Burrow, when it matters most or when they get close to the end zone, I mean, Jamar Chase is the target. As much as Tyler Boyd, he's a big body guy. I expected him to get more of those red zone targets. But, I mean, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase played together before, and right now it just looks like Jamar Chase is going to be that guy every week. And like I just mentioned Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins will be back in the lineup soon enough. And then that'll every now and then eat up at what Jamar Chase is going to be able to do week to week. But this week they go up against the Jaguars on Thursday Night Football, who are obviously they're just a bad team. They're 22nd against wide receivers right now in terms of fantasy football. So Jamar Chase, somebody that I expect, I think he has 5 touchdowns, I believe it is, up to this point. So probably going to continue to get those touchdowns per week. He could have a really, really good year with Joe Burrow. And I'm getting the 4s from Zach. That's 4 touchdowns, but even still, 3 weeks, 4 touchdowns. That's great for Jamar Chase. I expect that to continue to roll on. Number 4, is Tyreek Hill going up against Philly. Philly's first against wide receivers, and it I didn't want to put Tyreek up here, right? Because I have him on my team and I'm butthurt right now. I'm feeling it the last 2 weeks. He's really underperformed. But also the last 2 weeks, he's been bottled up and the Chiefs have lost. And I think Andy Reid and his staff understand that. I think Mahomes is going to understand that they're going to need to get Tyreek Hill the ball if they want to win games. And they have to let him be the most explosive offensive player in the league. Like you have to put the ball in his hands. It feels like that's what they're going to try to do this week. So I think Tyreek Hill, Philly's first against wide receiver because their run defense is absolute dog shit. Okay, so people run against them. I think Tyreek Hill is going to have a huge week this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 3 is going to be Devontae Adams. There's not a lot to say. He's Devontae Adams. He's got to be a top 3 guy, especially going up against the Steelers, who are 28th against wide receivers. Their secondary has looked really bad up to this point, which is actually pretty surprising. I thought they had the personnel for it coming into the season, but they have not looked good. And it's hard to run against Pittsburgh, so people are probably taking advantage of their secondary. And so even though I have Aaron Jones in the top 10 for running backs, I think Devontae Adams is going to be here for the wide receivers at number 3. The Packers just have a big week coming in against the Steelers, I believe.
Yeah, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, both of those guys are must starts every single week. I don't particularly like the matchup with Tyreek Hill against the Eagles, but it's Tyreek Hill, and he can blow by any secondary in the league. So you have to start him there. To go back to your number 5, Jamar Chase. He is one of the guys that are also on my must starts this week. Through the first 4 games, the Burrow-Chase combo has been on fire. They've had a total of 4 touchdowns and an average of 21 fantasy points for Jamar Chase. This week, they're facing their easiest pass defense to date in the Jaguars secondary that ranks 28th in yards per game and 27th in yards per reception. So I think that combo is going to be hitting. I wouldn't be surprised if Jamar Chase pulls in 2+ touchdowns this week.
Yep, that's how I feel too.
All right. You got number 5, Jamar Chase, number 4, Tyreek Hill, number 3, Devontae Adams, number 2.
Number 2 is going to be Brandin Cooks going up against Buffalo. Buffalo's third against wide receivers. I can understand why there might be maybe he has a bad week, but he's the offense. Like, he's the Texans offense. Who's Davis Mills going to throw to? Like, Brandin Cooks is the guy week to week. He's going to consistently be a top 10 player. I hadn't had him in my top 10 in the previous weeks just because I didn't know if they were going to be able to sustain offense, especially in the first game with Davis Mills at quarterback. But if Brandin Cooks is going to continue to see as many targets as he is and as explosive as he continues to be at 30 plus years old at this point, they're going to get down in this game against Buffalo. It's bound to happen, and I think Brandin Cooks is going to be the immediate beneficiary of what is probably going to be somewhere between 40 and 50 throws by Davis Mills this week. So I expect Brandin Cooks to have a huge week. So he comes in at number 2, and number 1, just like running back 1 is running back 1 for a reason, wide receiver 1 is wide receiver 1 for a reason. He does not disappoint. Cooper Kupp is annihilating everybody's, like Zach mentioned at the top of the episode. It's 30 points in 3 straight games. I mean, that's unreal. Him and Matthew Stafford, their connection right now is amazing. And especially, there's not as much run game as I expected from the Rams, but when you have Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp doing what they're doing, why slow that down? If they're going to continue to get the touchdowns every week, and Cooper Kupp is consistently finding open space in every secondary that they play. The Arizona Cardinals are 23rd against wide receivers. It's not the greatest secondary in the league, right? So Cooper Kupp is going to find the holes again, probably find the end zone again. Matthew Stafford, probably another really good week here. So Cooper Kupp stays wide receiver 1 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why Cooper Kupp can't be number one every single week with Matt Stafford throwing him the ball. I knew going into this season that Kupp was going to be huge. I was really hoping I could snag him in the draft, but uh, Storm beat me to him in like every single league, uh, which he tends to do with every player I try to draft. But
Yeah, me
anyway,
too.
but anyways, yeah, Cooper Kupp, man, he's just balling out. So he like we said, he's been putting up 30 points a game through the first three games. So there's no reason he's not number one on everybody's list at this point. And number two, Brandin Cooks, I had him on my do not start list last week. I actually put him on the bench, which was a mistake because you're right. He is their offense. And even if they have a bad matchup, he's still going to get the targets. He's being targeted over 50%, not over, but about 50% of the time on every single passing play, which is absolutely ridiculous. So just by pure volume alone, Brandin Cooks is going to get points when it comes to fantasy. So number two, Brandin Cooks, number one, Cooper Kupp. There's your top 10. All right, so to talk about some guys that Jeffe didn't talk about, I have my surefire must starts and sits for this week. We'll go back to the running backs, guys that you should be starting, in my opinion. I'll let Jeffe kind of sum up, give me his opinion on what he thinks. I'll start with Miles Sanders for the Philadelphia Eagles against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are giving up 160 yards per game and 5.17 yards per rush. They're one of only three teams giving up more than 5 yards per carry. But most importantly, Kansas City has given up a league-leading 7 rushing touchdowns on the season. So I'm looking for Miles Sanders to have a solid performance against the Chiefs' run defense.
The only thing that makes me nervous about that, because it's a great case. Like, it sounds for sure like you should be starting Miles Sanders, but even going back to last year, like, they just don't run the ball. And it might be a product of getting down, especially recency bias. I just watched that Dallas game, and I feel like they always get away from the run, and I don't know if Miles Sanders is big enough and physical enough to have great rushing games like that. He's somebody that needs to find some space. So I'm a little nervous about it, but with all the stats that you were just rattling off, and why it should be a good play, it's something that I would certainly consider at least a flex option.
Yeah, well, you would think like Nick Sirianni, he would also see these stats. He would know this, so you would take advantage of the fact that the Chiefs' rush defense is complete dog shit. But we will see. I don't know if he will take advantage of him. Being a former Colts offensive coordinator, you would think that with the way the Colts offense last year was playing, that he would make that adjustment and take advantage. But we'll see.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. Maybe that's something they try to do early in the game. But are they going to use Miles Sanders in the pass game if they get down? How much is Miles Sanders? I think that's where a lot of his value could come in. I don't know why they don't use him more in the pass game, honestly. But I could see that being the case. So yeah, maybe he either way, I guess, whether they can take advantage of the rushing lanes against KC, or he ends up they get down quick because KC is KC, and they have to get in comeback mode. Yeah, maybe he does have value either way there.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, and the last two guys, there's a 2-for-1 here. Got Darrell Henderson Jr. and Sony Michel for the Los Angeles Rams against the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona has given up 140 yards per game and are one of the three teams giving up more than 5 yards per carry. Henderson is averaging about 16 fantasy points per game on 15 carries and a touchdown. So I love his ceiling against this Cardinals defense. If Henderson is not back from injury, I think Michel should still have a solid game. What do you think?
That one's tough, right? Because
They're going
again,
to be passing the ball a lot.
yeah, they pass the ball so much there right now, and don't really show any signs of caring about getting the run established. If Darrell Henderson is playing, I feel really good about him. I think he's a very good player, and I think they can really take advantage of what the Cardinals do in the run game. So I would I would at least put him as a flex option against the Cardinals if he plays. Sony Michel, there's just nothing in his career that's told me like he's somebody I should start in my fantasy lineup. Like no matter what the matchup is, there's no consistency. He doesn't seem as explosive as you'd want in an elite NFL running back, right? So Sony Michel is a no for me, but Darrell Henderson, if he's playing somebody that I would at least consider.
All right, fair enough. To hit on my must-start wide receivers, I only have one more on the list. We already talked about DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and Jamar Chase. My other guy is Jacoby Myers for the Patriots against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's New England's number one wide receiver with 29 targets, 19 receptions on the year. He still hasn't found the end zone, but I expect that to change this week against one of the league's worst passing defenses. This Bucs D has given up a league-leading 9 touchdowns and 342 passing yards per game.
Yeah, I honestly, where I have Calvin Ridley at number 10, I thought about putting Jacoby Myers there. I think he's going to have a real good week. I think that the Buccaneers are about to beat the shit out of the Patriots here. So they should be passing a lot. Like Zach was mentioning, there's a big target share for Jacoby Myers, even with all the money that was spent. I think it was $12.5 million for both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. They pay Nelson Aguilar, they pay Kendrick Bourne, but it doesn't matter. Jacoby Myers is dominating the target share. It's just, can Mac Jones get him the ball? He can't be having 3 turnovers, 3 interceptions every game. Probably not likely, right? That's quite a bit, but it's got to look better. But either way, I think Jacoby Myers has shown up to this point that he can at least get the ball in his hands enough to be effective. And again, I think they'll be down for much of this game, and so he was somebody that I seriously considered putting inside my top 10. I think he'll be somewhere between 8 and 15 in the wide receiver rankings. Pretty good week for him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's all I got for my stardoms. Let's move on. Let's transition over to the situms, guys you want to avoid playing this week due to matchups. I have on my list here Alexander Madison for the Vikings against the Cleveland Browns. Last week, Madison had 26 carries for 112 yards against a weak Seattle defense. I don't see that happening again this week against a stingy Browns rushing defense that has only given up 201 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns on the season. There is a chance Dalvin Cook may be back from injury, but if he's not, and Madison is a guy in Minnesota, I'm avoiding him this week. I don't like the matchup.
Yeah, I was factoring in when I was doing the running back rankings, I was factoring in the fact that Dalvin Cook might be back, he might not. Whether it's him or Alexander Madison, I don't think they'll be top 10 this week. And for a lot of the reason that you were talking about, that Browns front 7 is nasty. They're not giving up much on the ground right now. And so I don't expect them to have a good week.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next guy is Damien Harris for the New England Patriots against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Only 37% of the Patriots' plays are rushing plays, and they've only racked up a total of 275 yards and 2 touchdowns in 3 games. This Buccaneers rushing defense is one of the best when it comes to defending against running backs, giving up only 63 yards per game and 1 touchdown on the year. It's a no-go for me with Damien Harris this week.
Yeah, me too. Maybe he gets some more passing game work with James White not being there. So that might add some value to him. And so that, at the end of the week, we might be wrong about this one, but you don't play somebody, a running back going up against the Buccaneers. It just doesn't go well. Their running defense is really good. They have probably the best front 7 in the NFL, at least when it comes to rushing. So somebody that I would definitely stay away from this week. I agree.
Yep. And we've already talked about Saquon Barkley earlier. To kind of piggyback off what I was talking about with Denver's defense against Saquon week 1, the Ravens are playing Denver this week. And so I don't like Latavius Murray, Tyson Williams, Devontae Freeman. This Broncos rush defense is top 3. I think this game will mostly be Lamar Jackson running all over the field as the Ravens will struggle to get the run game and passing game going.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I think the Denver defense is going to make things really hard for the entire offense there. And I mean, there's not going to be, from what we've seen so far, not going to be any consistency with the Ravens running backs. I thought they would do great against Detroit. Both of them would be able to have decent days against Detroit, and neither of them were relevant against Detroit. Don't really know, what they're thinking there. It's a team that usually has a really good running game, so it's hard to imagine that they have running back there that's not going to be fantasy relevant. But I would agree. I'd stay away from both of them this week. No way I'm playing them against Denver.
All right, and I saved the best running back sit 'em for last. I'm anticipating an argument from you, but I don't know about this one. I have Ezekiel Elliott for the Dallas Cowboys against the Carolina Panthers. Zeke has had strong back-to-back performances, but that was against the Chargers and the Eagles, both of whom are at the back end of the league in terms of the rushing defense. This week, he's taken on the stingiest defense out there in the Carolina Panthers. Carolina has only given up a league leading 45 yards per game and only 2.6 yards per carry. Absolutely ridiculous. Plus, they've only given up one rushing touchdown this season. I really don't like this matchup for Zeke or Tony Pollard for that matter. What do you think?
Um, you know, uh, well, I agreed with everything you said until the very end there because
Or Tony Pollard?
I think this is going to be a Tony Pollard game because of what you said. I think they're going to make things tough in the running lanes, and I think this is going to be a game where they have to game plan to pass more. I mean, they're going to have to, even with J.C. Horn goes out in the Panthers
Yeah,
trade.
but that Carolina pass defense isn't a slouch either.
Yeah, exactly. They're not. But I also think it's one of the most interesting games of the weekend. I really am not sure which way to go, but I think I don't think it's going to be a good week for Zeke for a lot of the reasons you were talking about. I think Carolina's defense is for real. I think they are very for real at this point. Brian Burns is so good at football; it's ridiculous. So Zeke is somebody that I would sit this week. Tony Pollard is somebody that I would seriously consider as a flex option. I think he'll get more use, especially in the pass game. They may get down in that game and have to pass.
All right. We're going to transition over to the wide receiver sit-ems on the week. I have a pretty interesting list here. I don't know how you'll feel about it, but I guess we'll find out. I'll start with Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins for the Baltimore Ravens against this Denver Broncos defense. This Denver secondary has been locking up wide receivers through the first three games, giving up only 162 yards per game and a total of 2 touchdowns. They've also intercepted 4 balls, which is tied for 4th most in the league. I think they'll bring the pressure and, like I said earlier, force Lamar Jackson to beat them with his legs rather than his arm.
No, that's exactly how I see this game going. I think Denver is going to make things very, very difficult, especially in the pass game. We know about the corners they have, the defense that they have with the pass rush. Von Miller is all the way back. It's going to be very difficult for Lamar Jackson's receivers to get open, and maybe somebody slips out and gets a touchdown. Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins both have wheels, right? So anything is possible. But like you, I expect this to be a very difficult week. I would stay away from Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins.
All right, another combo. I said last week I didn't like the Cowboys wide receivers matchup against the Eagles, and I hit the nail on the head. So Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb against the Carolina Panthers. I don't like it. Last week each of them had 3 receptions each and under 10 fantasy points. So they're back on my sit-em list this week again against the Panthers defense that boasts the number 1 ranked secondary in the league, giving up only 146 yards a game.
No, I'm glad you brought them up because it reminds me about Dalton Schultz. He's had flashes in his career, but at another game, like you're talking about, this is going to be a tough game for the wide receivers in Dallas, which is why I think Tony Pollard's going to have value in this upcoming game and why I think Dalton Schultz will. But I do think it's going to be a tough game for both Amari and CeeDee. I think they need Gallup to get back in that lineup to give them the versatility that they want in that 3-man threat that secondaries really have a hard time defending. Again, like they're going up against a tough defense in the Panthers this week. I think you're probably starting Amari anyways because he's Amari freaking Cooper, but man, it's tough. I think they're gonna have a bad week. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Amari only had like 5 points last weekend against the Eagles, so uh, I don't know. I have both those guys on my set list, so we'll see what happens. This Carolina defense is for real, man. All right, so the last group I have here, and I say group because it's just not one single person. This was a very, very tough call. I debated this, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiving core against the New England Patriots. Now, hear me out. Matchup wise, New England has a top 3 passing defense, but we all know just how explosive Tom Brady and the Tampa boys can be. Plus, you throw in the whole Brady Belichick dynamic and who will have the edge against who after all those years together. So I'm really iffy on this one. But after some thought, because of how much Brady spreads the ball around and the market share those receivers get and the tough matchup, statistically speaking, I decided I was going to put them here for week 4.
So this is one of those situations where I feel like stats up to this point in the season are misleading, because the Patriots have played the Dolphins, who don't have a great passing game, and the Jets, who were abysmal in that game against the Patriots. So
Yeah, but it's Bill Belichick, man. He's been doing it for 20 years, and they don't even have Stephon Gilmore.
right, but if you think about Brady being there for 20 years. He knows their offensive system. He knows their defensive system. He played against that defense for 20 years. He knows everything Belichick wants to do. We recently heard that, one of the things Belichick does is switches his defense from week to week, depending on what the quarterback's bad at. So while I think he'll be able to disturb Tom Brady a little bit, I don't think they have the talent. I mean, if you look at the talent on the Bucs offense compared to the talent on the Patriots defense, I don't think it's there. I like J.C. Jackson a lot, cornerback for the Patriots, but Chris Godwin right now is a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, very quietly a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Mike Evans coming alive. They're getting Antonio Brown back. It should be a very productive, and they don't run the ball. Like if they ran the ball like 20 times in a game, I might say, oh, maybe the wide receivers have a more down game. But even if they get up, they're just going to pass the ball. So the wide receivers should do well.
Well, let me ask you this. I don't know if Antonio Brown's coming back. Let's just assume that he's going to be back for this week. You got Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. You have one of those 3 guys on your fantasy team. You have to make a decision whether to start them against this New England Patriots defense or somebody else who may not have as big of a name as them, but has a better matchup on the week. Who are you looking at playing?
Okay, so let's say Christian Kirk, because Christian Kirk has quietly looked pretty good for the Cardinals, right? Which would be pretty tough because you don't know which receiver is going to get it week to week. Chris Godwin, the way he's played, I'd start him over Christian Kirk. Um, Mike Evans, probably not. I would start Antonio Brown, would be a flex option for me. Going back up to New England, a little bad blood there maybe. So maybe Tom tries to get him in the end zone, tries to get Gronk in the end zone. I think, if I had to pick one to not start over Christian Kirk, it would be Mike Evans.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I guess that's why we agree to disagree sometimes. I mean, like I said, between the market share of Brady dishing it out to all these different receivers and tight ends, and how Bill Belichick is, especially game planning for Brady, because I mean, Belichick sat there and watched Brady every single day too, so he's going to be able to just pick and choose the little buttons he wants to push for him. So I don't know. It was a tough call. I just wanted to have this conversation, so that's why all those things together, I put them here because I don't know who on the Buccaneers will have a breakout game. One of them is going to put up some points. You just don't know who. So that's why I put them here, but we'll see how it all turns out. But regardless, it's going to be a hell of a game to watch this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Patriots are probably going to lose by like 40 points. I can't wait to watch it.
That'll be great. All right. Well, that's all we have for you guys this week. We appreciate you all tuning in. Hopefully, Jeffe and I were able to provide you with some insight to help get you an advantage in your fantasy league. Just a reminder, you can hop into our weekly Pigskin Pick'em contest where you can directly compete with Brad, Jeffe, and myself. You can find the link on our Facebook, Twitter page at Horsemen Sports. If you're able to beat us out on the season, we'll get you on the podcast. Special shout out to all our WUBI live listeners for tuning in. You can catch the Horsemen Pro Football Talk podcast and Fantasy Central on WUBI Live every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The app is available for download in your app store, or you can visit wubi.live. Good luck to you all this weekend, and we will see you next week.